camera, and I was, by default, it was looking through the camera on the netbook itself. So I was a little disappointed. I thought, the camera that I bought was not compatible with Linux, and then I have to return it. As it turns out, I just have to change the parameter to look at the other camera, and it worked just fine. Okay, so that means you can use software like that, to do some monitoring. I had to do something like that because somebody sampled my green tea in my office. I did not like that. I found one of my green tea bottles, opened. The cap is not sealed anymore. Part of the content is gone, but it was back in the refrigerator. I do not like that idea. So I'm gonna set up set one of these things up in my office so I can monitor who has been sampling my green tea. Yep.
I have some neighbors that live down the street from my house, and they have cameras all around their house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. The lady there told me that it was amazing what you would see at odd hours of the early morning.
Mm-hmm.
Police chases, people sleeping in their house, street going out of house, you collect all that information on it.
Well, when you set up something like this for that sort of surveillance, you have to. There are many factors that is outside of the scope of this class that you have to consider. One of those things is the sensitivity of your camera. Most cameras will do fine if there's enough light. Okay, they will give you really good color, good resolution. But as soon as it becomes dark, then the camera will only give you fuzzy noise and stuff like that. It cannot really do any recording anymore. And a lot of cameras need to rely on LEDs to kind of light up, whatever you want to, record. And that only works, so much. You can buy high sensitivity cameras that will work really well with just normal lighting at night. Those are rated at 0.003 lux of lighting. And they can take pictures with existing light without any type of LED assistance.
Yeah, they do pretty good because they have street lights around
Okay.
the house, so they get good illumination.
But you also need high resolution if you want to identify, a person. Otherwise you just see people running around, but you cannot see or identify their faces. So that's the other issue. Yep.
And how secure would this kind of program be if you could just log into a server or log into the server?
It has authentication, so you have to log in through authentication, and I cannot remember for sure whether it's going through HTTPS or not, but if you know how to configure a web server, you can certainly make it go through HTTPS, which is an entirely different topic for a networking class, or at least for a networking class that talks about how to set up servers. Any other questions? Any questions? I'm just trying to point out, possibilities that were not there, like a few years ago, or at least, job opportunities that were not significant. But I think they are significant now. I mean, there are more, it's easier. The technology is out there, the hardware is out there, but not the expertise. So whoever has the expertise to do it, has, a possibility of making a living out of it, while helping out other people. Yep.
What kind of training is involved with installing? What kind of education is involved?
In terms of maintaining, there's really not a whole lot of maintenance other than maintaining a web server, basically a computer with programs running on it. So you need to keep the server up to date in terms of the version of the operating system, the Apache server itself, and so on and so forth. You need to monitor, is it running out of disk space? Do you need to add more disk space, and so on and so forth? But in terms of the cameras, from time to time, I can see people trying to upgrade the cameras so that you can go from a stationary one to a is it called PTZ? Pan, tilt, and zoom. Okay, so you can remotely control the camera like this, up and down, and also swivel sideways, and also zoom in and zoom out. And you can operate all of that using a web browser. And this is all free. You can also define motion detection zones. Let me see if there's a picture of that. This is a PTZ setup, so you can see there's a remote control that will let you control the pen tilt. and also the zoom as well as the focus, for this particular model. So that could be interesting. That could be helpful because now you can remotely, zoom into a particular area, and look at the details of the area. You can tile, just like any type of good software. You can tile, all the images, from that are connected to that server. And this is a typical image. It's very noisy. You have a lot of speckle, okay, because it's low light, and the camera is not designed for low light applications. And let me see if I can find one that has a motion detection thingy. Oh, I guess not. So anyway, anyone who's interested, if you have a webcam, if you have one of those webcams that come with a laptop computer, you can play with this already. Especially if you run Linux on the laptop, because Linux is always ready to run the web server. You don't even need to configure your network because you can always connect to localhost. And you just go to your browser. You just say localhost. Okay, just like this. You say once the software is properly installed and configured, you just say localhost/ZoneMinder. I don't have ZoneMinder installed, with the live DVD, and that's why there's nothing here. But if I had, it would have popped up a web page already and say, okay, what do you want to do now? Okay. Any questions about this? No? Nobody seems to be interested? Okay, well, if there are no interest about that, we'll go back and look into Newegg. So we are almost done with the build your own computer topic. Are there any questions about this particular topic, how to build your own computer? No questions? Okay. I think last time we were looking at cases already. We have not completed that process. And while it is doing this, we'll go look for Leon Lee motherboard tray, because I want to show you a picture of a motherboard tray and the concept of having one like that. This is a good picture, I think. Okay, so that's basically, this is the case. The left-hand side is nothing more than just a case. But the right-hand side, this part that slides out, is called a motherboard tray. A motherboard tray is nothing more than a piece of metal that has, a back side to it, and it doesn't seem to be very useful, but it really is, because what you do is this piece can slide out of the case completely. Okay. Then what you do is you have access to both the front, the back, and all four sides of it. Then you have all the space that you need to install a motherboard. Put the screws down, put all the connectors from the CPU onto the motherboard, and so on and so forth. Because when the tray is entirely out, you are not restricted in terms of access to the sides. Okay. So when the whole thing is assembled, including the memory chips and whatnot, the memory modules, then you can slide the whole thing back in to the case, and then you can connect the cables from the power supply, which in this case is over here, to various parts of the motherboard. Okay, I personally find this very helpful because I have a colleague who has about the same size of motherboard from the same manufacturer, but without a motherboard tray, and she said it was really hard to put on certain screws at certain locations because the CPU cooler was blocking access to those particular locations, and this makes it very easy to do it. Yep.
You had the expansion cards before the train, or
I would put the expansion cards in because when it's outside, it is so much easier. A lot of CPU cases now has a fan that is directly on top of the expansion cards. So that means you have to install the cards before you put it back in the case. Otherwise, it would just be kind of you have all kinds of cables going around. It's just a whole lot easier to do it when the CPU tray, the motherboard tray is outside.
I can see where that's full. That's nice.
Yep. It's still complicated because you still have all those cables to hook up to, like the USB cable, the firewire cable, the power cables, the fan cables, and so on. But it does make the motherboard itself a lot easier to assemble and put it on onto the tray. Okay. So this is a nice picture. This is a really good representative picture. Huh?
How long was that? How long has that been out for? Did they have been making a case like that for?
A long time. I mean, they're more expensive.
Like that?
Yeah, it's more expensive. These cases are more expensive than the ones without a slide-out tray. Because they have these extra parts. The rail. The extra thing. But personally, I find it very helpful. If you plan to upgrade your PC a lot or change configurations, or if you want to clean it up, it is still helpful. Okay, so let's go back to cases. Has anyone set up a home theater PC, recently? Okay, me, sort of. Okay. So, what kind of special consideration do you have when you're setting up a home theater PC, an HT PC?
What kind of noise is going to be in the room itself?
Exactly. What kind of noise is going to leak out of the case? And they have special cases with a lot of dampening material to dampen the vibration of the hard drive. You have to specify special fans to make it go more silently. And some even have like an overall enclosure that does not restrict airflow, but it does help reduce the noise. Okay. Any questions at this point? Yep, go ahead.
If you didn't want to fork over the money to make one, or to pay for one, could you make one with a decent quality? Or
the only problem is, how do you make sure that you have the proper airflow? Yes, you can make one. I mean, you can make one out of, just about any material. The only part that is difficult is how do you mount, the components onto the case that you are making yourself, because you still need those mount points for the motherboard. You can have different methods of mounting the motherboard. In other words, if you have like a wood clamp or something like that, you could use a wood clamp to clamp down the motherboard, but you cannot flex the motherboard when you're clamping it down. So you got to be careful about how you mount your motherboard onto the case that you're making. Yep.
It doesn't matter which material the case is made out of?
It matters a little bit. If you make a case out of aluminum, aluminum is a very good heat conductor. So in theory, at least, it helps to dissipate some heat just through the case itself, because if you feel an aluminum case, it does feel slightly warm, which means it's radiating heat or getting rid of some of the heat by radiating to the environment. But when you make one out of plastic, plastic is not a very good conductor of heat. So the plastic one will rely solely on airflow to get rid of the heat. It only matters a little bit, it's not really a big deal. You do want to use material that is not brittle. Plastic is kind of brittle, and that can break easily. That would not be good when you make a PC case out of it. Okay, any questions at this point? Now, if anyone is making a PC, you have to kind of observe the airflow. Okay, let's say this is the side of a PC. Okay, I'll even make it a somewhat three-dimensional picture. Okay, this is the front. You have your DVD drive here. You have your multimedia reader slots over here. The power switch. Then you have your USB connectors and your speakers, microphone, and whatnot over here. Most PCs now have a fan opening all the way to the front. And this one usually is an intake. In other words, this particular location will basically suck air in this direction. And depending on where you put your hard drives, sometimes they put hard drives right behind this fan so that this fan can cool down the hard drives directly. And then what you do is you want to kind of follow the natural airflow direction, and then use the back only for exhaust purposes. Okay, so